When? There is a powerful principle that governs success, and it is often overlooked because it is too simple for most people to respect. The less you talk, the more you win. In a world where everyone is trying to be heard, when the real power belongs to those who know when to remain silent. Because silence is not emptiness, it is control. It is discipline. Form. Every time you speak unnecessarily, you release energy. You expose plans. You dilute intention. Words, when used without purpose, become a leak in the system of your potential. But when you learn to restrain your speech, when you begin to store power, you see, winners are not the loudest people in the room. They are the most intentional. They understand that talking about a thing is not the same as doing it. In fact, excessive talking creates a false sense of accomplishment. You feel like you are moving forward, but in reality, when you are only entertaining the idea of progress. Silence, on the other hand, forces execution. When you are quiet, you observe more. When you notice patterns others miss, you listen deeply, and in listening, you gain understanding. When? And understanding gives you an advantage that noise can never provide. Many people lose because they reveal too much too soon. When they announce their plans before they are ready, they seek validation instead of results. But when you operate in silence, when you protect your vision, you give it room to grow without interference, without doubt, without unnecessary opinions. Silence builds discipline. It teaches you to control your impulses, not just in speech, but in action. When? It trains your mind to focus on what matters instead of reacting to everything around you. And here is the truth: talking consumes time, but silence multiplies it. Every hour spent in idle conversation is an hour taken away from building, learning, and progressing. But when you reduce unnecessary speech, you create space to think, to plan, to execute at a higher level. The less you talk, and the more you can do. And doing is what produces results. There is also a deeper dimension to silence. It strengthens your presence. When you speak less, your words carry more weight. People listen because they know you do not speak casually. When? Your voice becomes valuable because it is rare. This is how influence is built, not through volume, but through precision. So, if you want to win, learn to master your tongue, not by suppressing your voice, but by refining it. Speak with purpose. Speak with clarity. Speak when it matters. But more importantly, learn to be silent when it does not. Because in that silence, when you will find focus. In that silence, you will find strategy. And in that silence, when you will build the kind of success that does not need to be announced. It speaks for itself. The less you talk, the more you protect your energy. The more you protect your energy, the more you execute. And the more you execute, the more you win. So choose your words carefully, but choose your silence even more carefully. Silence is often misunderstood in a world that rewards noise, but those who truly understand power recognize that silence is not the absence of strength, it is the presence of control. When you value silence as a strategic advantage, you begin to operate from a position of awareness rather than reaction. You are no longer compelled to respond to everything, explain yourself to everyone, or prove your worth through constant expression. Instead, you move with intention, choosing your moments carefully, and speaking only when it serves a purpose. There is a discipline in silence that most people never develop. It requires restraint, patience, and confidence. Anyone can speak, but not everyone can hold back. Holding back means you are not driven by impulse. It means you are governed by clarity. When you are silent, you give yourself space to think before you act. You observe situations from a higher level, seeing patterns, when motives and opportunities that others miss because they are too busy talking. Silence sharpens perception. And perception sharpens decision making. When you speak less, you also reveal less. This is where silence becomes strategic. When not everyone needs access to your thoughts, your plans, or your next move. The more you expose prematurely, the more you open the door to distraction, doubt, and interference. But when you learn to keep things to yourself, you protect your vision. You allow your ideas to develop fully without being influenced or weakened by outside opinions. Silence becomes a shield that guards your focus and preserves your direction. There is also power in how silence shapes your presence. When you are not constantly speaking, your words gain weight. People begin to listen more carefully because they understand that when you do speak, it matters. Your voice becomes associated with value rather than noise. This kind of presence commands respect without demanding attention. It creates influence without force. Silence, in this way, becomes a tool for leadership because it teaches you to communicate with precision instead of excess. Silence also strengthens your internal world. When you remove the habit of constant talking, you become more connected to your thoughts. You begin to reflect more deeply, question more honestly, and understand yourself at a higher level. This internal clarity translates into external effectiveness. You act with purpose because you have taken the time to think with purpose. You are not rushing to respond, you are choosing to respond, and that choice is where power lies. Many people talk because they are uncomfortable with silence. They fill empty space with words to avoid confronting their own thoughts or to seek validation from others. But when you embrace silence, you eliminate that dependency. You no longer need approval through conversation. You become self-sufficient in your confidence, grounded in your direction, and focused on your execution. In practical terms, silence saves energy. Every unnecessary conversation drains mental and emotional resources that could be used to build something meaningful. When you reduce that noise, you redirect your energy into action. You work more, think more clearly, and move more efficiently. Silence is not passive, it is productive. Valuing silence as a strategic advantage transforms how you move through life. You stop reacting and start positioning. You stop explaining and start executing. You stop seeking attention and start building results. And in that shift, you discover that silence is not holding you back, it is setting you apart. Speaking is one of the most common human habits, yet very few people ever learn to use it with intention. Too often, words are used to fill silence rather than to create impact. But when you begin to understand that every word carries weight, you realize that speaking should never be automatic, it should be deliberate. To speak only when it adds value is to operate with discipline, awareness, and purpose. Most conversations are filled with unnecessary noise, opinions that were not asked for, explanations that are not needed, and reactions that do not move anything forward. This kind of speaking does not strengthen your presence. It weakens it. When you talk just to fill space, your words lose meaning. They become predictable, easy to ignore, and ultimately ineffective. But when you restrain yourself and choose your moments carefully, your voice becomes something people pay attention to. Value-driven speech begins with awareness. Before you speak, you ask yourself a simple question. Does this need to be said? When? And beyond that, does it need to be said by me? And does it need to be said right now? When these questions create a filter that removes unnecessary communication and leaves only what is meaningful. This is not about being silent all the time. It is about being purposeful every time. When your words are intentional, when they carry clarity, instead of speaking in circles or over-explaining, you communicate directly and effectively. People understand you faster and your message lands stronger. When? This kind of communication builds respect because it shows that you value not only your own time, but also the time and attention of others. You are not speaking to be heard, you are speaking to contribute. When there is also a level of confidence required to avoid filling silence. Many people talk because they are uncomfortable with quiet moments. They feel the need to keep conversations going. Even if it means saying something meaningless. But confidence allows you to sit in silence without feeling the need to escape it. When it allows you to listen fully, to process what is being said, and to respond thoughtfully instead of reacting instantly. Listening, in fact, becomes your greatest advantage when you speak less. When you are not focused on what you are going to say next. When you can truly understand what others are saying. You pick up on details, emotions, and intentions that are often missed. This deeper level of understanding allows you to respond with insight rather than surface-level commentary. And that is where real value is created. Speaking only when it adds value also protects your energy. Every conversation requires mental effort, and when you engage in too many low-value interactions, your focus becomes scattered. By reducing unnecessary speech, you conserve that energy and redirect it toward things that matter. Your goals, your work, and your growth. Your communication becomes sharper because it is not diluted by constant output. Over time, this approach transforms your presence. People begin to recognize that when you speak, it matters. Your words are not random. They are considered. They carry intention, and that intention creates impact. When you do not need to raise your voice or speak more than others to be influential. In fact, the opposite becomes true when the less you speak without purpose, the more powerful your voice becomes when you do. Choosing not to fill space with words is not a limitation, it is a form of mastery. It is the ability to control your expression rather than being controlled by impulse. And in that control, you create communication that is not just heard, but respected, remembered, and valued. Time is the only resource you possess that cannot be recovered once it is spent. Money can be earned again. Opportunities can return in different forms, relationships can be rebuilt, but time, once gone, is gone forever. That is why guarding your time is not just a good habit. It is a necessity for anyone who intends to live with purpose and achieve anything meaningful. Most people treat time casually. They give it away without thinking through endless conversations, distractions, and commitments that do not align with their goals. When they allow others to dictate their schedule, interrupt their focus, and consume their energy. But when you begin to understand that your life is measured in time, your perspective shifts. When you realize that every minute wasted is a piece of your life given away without return. Guarding your time requires a deep sense of responsibility. You must become intentional about how you spend each hour. This means learning to say no without guilt. Not every request deserves your attention. And not every opportunity deserves your involvement. When you say yes to everything, you dilute your effectiveness. But when you become selective, you concentrate your energy on what truly matters. There is also a discipline in structuring your day. Time does not manage itself, you must manage it. Without structure, your day will be filled with reactive activities rather than productive ones. You will spend more time responding than creating. But when you take control of your schedule, when you decide in advance where your time will go, when you begin to move with purpose instead of drifting through the day. Distractions are one of the greatest threats to your time. When they come in many forms, social media, unnecessary meetings, idle conversations, and even your own lack of focus. Each distraction may seem small, but over time, they accumulate and steal hours from your life. Guarding your time means recognizing these distractions for what they are and eliminating them with discipline. It means choosing focus over entertainment, purpose over comfort. Another important aspect of protecting your time is understanding the value of your energy. Time and energy are connected. If your energy is scattered, your time will be wasted. But when your energy is focused, your time becomes productive. This is why you must align your activities with your priorities. Spend your best hours on your most important work, when not on tasks that do not move your life forward. You must also be careful about the people you allow access to your time. Not everyone respects it and not everyone understands its value. Some people will consume your time without contributing anything meaningful in return. Guarding your time means setting boundaries. It means recognizing who adds value to your life and who drains it. This is not about being distant or unavailable. It is about being wise. When you begin to protect your time, you will notice a shift in your results. You will accomplish more. Think more clearly and feel more in control of your life. You will no longer feel rushed or overwhelmed because you are no longer allowing your time to be controlled by external forces. Guarding your time is about recognizing that your life is limited. Every day you are given a fixed number of hours, and how you use them determines the quality of your future. If you waste them, you weaken your potential. But if you protect them, invest them and use them wisely, you build a life of purpose and achievement. So treat your time with the seriousness it deserves. Protect it from anything that does not align with your vision. Use it with intention, and you will begin to see that time, when respected, becomes your greatest ally rather than your greatest regret. Most people underestimate how much their focus is being quietly stolen, not by major distractions, but by small, unnecessary conversations that seem harmless in the moment. A few minutes here, a quick chat there, constant back and forth messages. Individually, they feel insignificant, but collectively they fragment your attention and weaken your ability to concentrate deeply. If you are serious about growth, you must recognize that not every conversation deserves your time or your mental energy. When focus is a limited resource, it requires uninterrupted space to develop strength. When every time you engage in a conversation that has no clear purpose, you break that flow. Your mind shifts from creation to reaction, from depth to surface level thinking. And once that focus is broken, it takes time to rebuild. This is why even short interruptions can have long-lasting effects on your productivity. Reducing unnecessary conversations is not about isolating yourself or becoming distant. It is about becoming intentional. You begin to evaluate interactions based on value. Does this conversation move something forward? Does it contribute to growth, clarity, or execution? Or is it simply filling time? When you start asking these questions, you naturally begin to withdraw from conversations that do not serve a purpose. There is also a hidden cost in constant communication. Mental clutter. Every conversation leaves behind fragments, thoughts, opinions, emotions that occupy space in your mind. When you engage in too many of these exchanges, your mind becomes crowded. It becomes harder to think clearly, harder to prioritize, and harder to stay aligned with your goals. But when you reduce unnecessary talk, you create mental space. And in that space, clarity begins to form. Another important factor is energy. Conversations require energy, especially when they are repetitive, negative, or unproductive. The more you engage in them, the more drained you become. And when your energy is low, your performance suffers. By limiting these interactions, you preserve your energy for what truly matters: your work, your growth, your purpose. Learning to step back from unnecessary conversations also requires confidence. Many people feel the need to respond to every message, participate in every discussion, or entertain every interaction out of fear of being perceived as rude or unavailable. But discipline means prioritizing what matters over what is expected. You can be respectful without being constantly accessible. You can be present without being everywhere. Practical control begins with boundaries. Set specific times for communication instead of allowing it to interrupt your entire day. Keep your responses direct and purposeful. Avoid being pulled into long, unproductive exchanges. And most importantly, become comfortable with silence. You do not need to reply instantly. You do not need to engage in everything. Sometimes the most productive decision is to not respond at all. As you begin to reduce unnecessary conversations, you will notice a shift in your focus. Your thoughts will become clearer. Your work will become deeper. And your time will feel more controlled. You will move from a reactive state to a proactive one. Instead of constantly responding to others, you will start directing your own actions with intention. Every conversation is a choice. And every choice either strengthens your focus or weakens it. When you become disciplined enough to choose wisely, when you protect one of your most valuable assets, your ability to concentrate. And with sustained focus, you gain the power to produce results that scattered attention can never achieve. Listening is one of the most undervalued disciplines in a world obsessed with being heard. Everyone wants to speak, to express, to be recognized, but very few take the time to truly listen. Yet, The paradox is this: the more you listen, the more you grow. When? Because wisdom does not come from what you say, it comes from what you are able to receive, process, and understand. When you speak, when you are only repeating what you already know. But when you listen, you expose yourself to perspectives, insights, and knowledge that exist beyond your current understanding. This is where growth begins. When? Silence becomes the gateway through which new ideas enter your mind, refining your thinking and expanding your awareness. When listening requires humility, it demands that you set aside the need to interrupt, correct, or immediately respond. When? Many people do not listen to understand, they listen to reply. When? Their focus is on what they will say next rather than what is being said now. This habit blocks wisdom because it keeps the mind closed. But when you shift your intention from responding to understanding, everything changes. You begin to hear not just words, but meaning. You pick up on tone, intention, and deeper context. There is also a level of intelligence that develops through observation. When you listen more, you naturally observe more. You notice patterns in how people think, how they behave, and how they react. When? You begin to understand motivations, strengths, and weaknesses, both in others and in yourself. This awareness gives you an advantage. When? Because decisions made from understanding are always stronger than those made from assumption. Silence sharpens your ability to process information. Instead of reacting instantly, you give yourself time to think. When? That pause allows you to filter what is useful, discard what is not, and form a response that is thoughtful rather than impulsive. When? In that space, your words gain clarity and precision. You are no longer speaking just to participate, you are speaking to contribute. When listening also builds trust and respect. When people feel heard, they feel valued. And when they feel valued, they are more open. When? More honest and more willing to share meaningful insights. This creates deeper connections and more productive interactions. Your silence, in this case, becomes a powerful tool for influence. Not because you are speaking when, but because you are creating an environment where others can express themselves fully. Another important aspect is self-awareness. When you reduce how much you speak, you become more conscious of your own thoughts. You start to recognize patterns in your thinking. When? Areas where you need growth, and moments where you may have spoken too quickly in the past. This reflection strengthens your internal clarity, which directly impacts your external actions. In a practical sense, when? Listening saves you from unnecessary mistakes. Many problems arise because people act on incomplete information. They assume, they rush. When? They misunderstand. But when you take the time to listen fully, you gather the details needed to make better decisions. You respond with accuracy instead of guesswork. Over time, this discipline transforms the way you communicate. You become more measured, more insightful, and more effective. Your words carry depth because they are built on understanding. When? You no longer feel the need to dominate conversations because you recognize that value is not in how much you say, when, but in how well you understand. Wisdom is not something you chase through constant expression. It is something that enters quietly. When? Through stillness, through attention, through the willingness to be silent long enough to receive it. And when you truly embrace this, when you begin to realize that silence is not empty, It is full of answers waiting to be heard. When? There is a difference between those who achieve results and those who only talk about them. When? And that difference is often found in how they handle their plans. Many people feel an urge to announce what they are about to do. When? They speak about their goals, share their ideas, and look for validation before they have taken meaningful action. When? But this habit weakens execution. It exposes your vision too early, invites unnecessary opinions, and creates a false sense of progress. When you plan in private, you protect the integrity of your intention. Privacy gives your ideas room to develop without interference. One. In the early stages, a vision is fragile. It is still forming, still evolving, still gaining clarity. When you expose it too soon, it becomes vulnerable to doubt, both from others and from yourself. People may not understand your direction. When? And their lack of understanding can influence your confidence. But when you keep your plans to yourself, you allow them to mature. When? You refine them quietly, strengthen them internally, and build a foundation that is not dependent on external approval. When planning in private also sharpens your focus. When you are not constantly explaining your next move, when you spend more time thinking through it. You analyze details, anticipate challenges, and prepare solutions. This depth of thinking leads to better strategies. Instead of rushing into action, you move with clarity. You know what needs to be done, when, how it will be done, and why it matters. That level of preparation is what makes execution effective. Execution, however, when, is where everything is proven, and execution demands precision. It is not enough to have a good idea. When? You must be able to carry it out with discipline and accuracy. Precision means doing the right things at the right time with full attention. It means minimizing errors, eliminating distractions, and maintaining consistency in your actions. When? When your execution is precise, your results become predictable. There is also a psychological advantage in keeping your plans private. When you do not announce your intentions, you remove the pressure of external expectations. You are no longer performing for others when you are working for results. This allows you to move at your own pace, adjust your strategy when needed. When? And focus entirely on progress rather than perception. You are not concerned with how things look. You are committed to how things work. Another important aspect is energy conservation. Talking about your plans consumes energy that should be used for execution. When? It creates a temporary sense of accomplishment that can reduce your drive to act. But when you remain silent, when? That energy stays within you. It builds pressure, and that pressure fuels action. Instead of releasing your intentions through words, when you release them through results. Precision in execution also requires discipline in small actions. It is not just about major steps. When? It is about consistency in the details. Showing up on time, maintaining focus, following through on commitments, when? And adjusting when necessary. These are the elements that turn a plan into reality. Precision is built through repetition. When? Through attention and through a refusal to settle for careless effort. Over time, this approach sets you apart. When? While others are talking, you are building. While others are explaining, you are producing. And when your results finally become visible, they carry more weight because they were not preceded by noise. They speak for themselves. Planning in private is not about secrecy for the sake of hiding. It is about strategy. It is about protecting what matters until it is strong enough to stand. When? And executing with precision is about honoring that plan with disciplined action. When you combine the two, you create a powerful rhythm. When, think deeply, act deliberately, and let your results make the introduction. Not everyone needs to understand where you are going. When, and more importantly, not everyone is capable of helping you get there. When? One of the biggest mistakes people make is over-explaining their goals to individuals who have no role in their journey. This is not just unnecessary, it can be damaging. When you share your vision with the wrong audience, you invite confusion, doubt, and opinions that are not rooted in experience or alignment. A goal is not just an idea, it is a direction that requires focus, energy, and belief. In its early stages, it is especially sensitive. When you begin explaining it to people who lack the knowledge, discipline, or mindset to contribute, you risk exposing it to misunderstanding. They may question it, minimize it, or project their own limitations onto it. And even if you are confident, repeated exposure to that kind of response can slowly weaken your clarity. There is a difference between seeking guidance and seeking validation. Guidance comes from those who have experience, those who understand the path, those who can offer insight that sharpens your strategy. Validation, on the other hand, often comes from people who are not qualified to give it. When you explain your goals to everyone, you are often unconsciously seeking approval. But approval does not build results, execution does. Being selective about who you share your goals with is a form of discipline. It requires you to evaluate whether someone can truly add value. Can they provide knowledge? Can they offer constructive feedback? Can they challenge you in a way that strengthens your approach? If the answer is no, then sharing your plans serves no real purpose. It becomes noise, something that distracts rather than supports. There is also a matter of energy. Explaining your goals repeatedly takes effort. You find yourself justifying your decisions, clarifying your intentions, and responding to questions that do not move you forward. This drains the energy that should be directed toward action. Instead of working on your vision, you are talking about it. And talking, no matter how passionate, does not produce results. Another hidden risk is accountability without progress. When you tell too many people about your goals, you create a sense of obligation to prove something. But this pressure is often external and unproductive. It shifts your focus from building effectively to appearing consistent. True progress does not come from trying to impress others. It comes from disciplined, focused work done, whether anyone is watching or not. There is strength in moving quietly. When you keep your goals within a small circle or even to yourself, you create a controlled environment. Your focus remains intact. Your decisions are not influenced by unnecessary opinions. You move based on strategy, not reaction. And when challenges arise, you deal with them internally or with the right people, rather than exposing them to those who cannot help. This does not mean you isolate yourself completely. It means you become intentional. You choose a few voices that matter. People who understand growth, who respect discipline, who can offer insight when needed. These are the individuals who can contribute to your journey. Everyone else does not need access to your plans. When? Your goals are not meant to be explained, they are meant to be executed. The more you protect them from unnecessary exposure, when, the stronger they become, and when the results finally show, they will answer every question you never needed to respond to. When, there is a subtle trap that many people fall into. They confuse talking about progress with actually making progress. When it feels productive to discuss ideas, to share plans, to express intentions. But in reality, none of these produce tangible results. Words can create the illusion of movement, but only action creates real change. When you begin to replace talking with action, you shift from potential to performance. Every time you talk about what you are going to do, when you release a portion of the energy that should be used to actually do it, you feel a temporary sense of accomplishment, as if you have already taken a step forward but nothing has been built. This is why many people remain stuck. They are satisfied with expression instead of execution. But those who win understand that progress is measured by what is done, win not by what is said. Action requires effort, discipline, and consistency. It is not always comfortable, and it does not always bring immediate recognition. Talking, on the other hand, is easy. It requires no risk, no commitment, and no real accountability. That is why it becomes a habit. But comfort rarely leads to growth. When you choose action over talking, when you choose the harder path, the one that actually produces results, there is also a difference in how action and words are perceived. Words can be doubted, questioned, or ignored. People may listen, but they often wait to see proof. Results, however, remove doubt. They speak with clarity and authority. They do not need explanation because they are evidence. When you produce results, you eliminate the need to convince anyone of your capability. Your work becomes the proof. Replacing talking with action also strengthens your focus. Instead of spending time explaining your ideas, when you invest that time in developing them, you move from discussing possibilities to building realities. This creates momentum. Each completed task leads to another, and over time, that consistency compounds into significant progress. When? Another important aspect is self-trust. When you act consistently, you begin to trust yourself more. You know that when you decide to do something, you follow through. This builds confidence that is rooted in experience, not in words. But when you talk more than you act, that trust weakens. When you begin to doubt your own commitments because you see a pattern of unfulfilled intentions. Action also reveals truth. It shows you what works and what does not. You learn through doing, through adjusting, through refining your approach. Talking can never replace this process. You can plan, discuss, and analyze, but until you act, you are operating in theory. When execution turns theory into reality, and reality is where growth happens. There is a quiet power in those who focus on action. They do not feel the need to announce every step. They are not concerned with recognition at every stage. They are committed to the process. And because of that, their results eventually stand out. When? While others are still talking about what they will do, they have already done it. Over time, this discipline changes how people see you. You become known as someone who delivers, someone who follows through, someone whose words are backed by action. And eventually, you may not need to say much at all. Your work will speak for you. Results are the only language that everyone understands. They cut through noise, remove doubt, and establish credibility. So instead of explaining your plans, invest your energy into executing them. Let your progress be visible through what you produce, not through what you promise. Because in the long run, it is not what you say that defines you, it is what you do. Discipline is not built in moments of motivation. It is built through routines that remove the need to constantly decide what to do next. When your day is unstructured, idle time naturally fills the gaps. You drift between tasks, react to distractions, and lose valuable hours without realizing it. But when you create disciplined routines, you give your time direction. You replace randomness with intention, and in doing so, you eliminate the spaces where idleness thrives. A routine is more than a schedule, it is a system that protects your focus. It tells you where your energy should go before distractions have a chance to claim it. Instead of waking up and figuring things out as you go, you already know what needs to be done. This clarity removes hesitation. It reduces procrastination because the decision has already been made. You are no longer negotiating with yourself. You are executing a plan. Idle time often comes from a lack of structure between tasks. You finish one activity and then pause. Unsure of what comes next, that pause turns into scrolling unnecessary conversations or low-value activities that consume more time than intended. Disciplined routines close these gaps. They create a flow where one task leads directly into another. Your day becomes a sequence of purposeful actions rather than a collection of scattered moments. There is also a psychological benefit to routine. When you repeat the same productive behaviors consistently, they become automatic. When you no longer rely on willpower alone, your mind and body adapt to the rhythm. Making it easier to stay focused and harder to fall into distractions. What once required effort becomes habit, and habit reduces resistance. Creating routines also forces you to prioritize. You cannot structure your time effectively without deciding what truly matters. This means identifying your most important tasks and giving them dedicated space in your day. When your priorities are clear, idle time decreases because every hour has a purpose. You are not looking for something to do. You are following through on what you have already decided is important. Another key element is consistency. A routine only works if it is maintained. It is not about perfection, it is about repetition. Even on days when motivation is low, when the routine keeps you moving, it provides stability. And over time, that consistency compounds into significant progress. Small, disciplined actions repeated daily will always outperform bursts of effort followed by long periods of inactivity. You must also be intentional about transitions. How you move from one task to another determines whether you stay focused or fall into idle time.